Hello, hello. Welcome to my review of Intelligence Reframed by Howard Gardner. Chapter 1 is called Intelligence and the Individual, and it basically talks about the history of the desire to want to identify intelligence as it pertained to whatever culture. So it talks about different kind of intelligence tests that different societies and cultures gave to their young people to try and identify them. And then it basically ends in the author kind of talking and hinting at his idea that there are different areas of intelligences, or almost multiple intelligences. Then we are led into chapter 2, which is before multiple intelligences. And the author brings up two main books in this. He brings up the bell curve and then emotional intelligence. He talks about the bell curve, and interestingly, it's not that this particular book brought up any new ideas. It actually talked about ideas that had been around and been considered, which is that very few people have very low intelligence and very few people have very high intelligence, and that the majority of people are clumped kind of in the middle. What these authors of the bell curve went on to propose is that those with very low intelligence, they tapped some youth study, and they talked about people with very low intelligence being that much more apt to be on welfare, crime, be below poverty level, and these were kind of, these ideas took the study and the data that was well known and pushed it a step further. And emotional intelligence, for this particular author, signaled that there were other people looking at different intelligences than just the traditional. There are three key questions that are identified in the text, and I have to read the first one to make sure that I don't mess it up here. The first, is intelligence singular, or are there various relatively independent intellectual faculties? This is basically talking about, is there a general intelligence that we as a society share? The general public focuses on the second question a little bit more than any of the other two, and that is intelligence generally an inherited trait? This is something that's more predominantly found in the Western world. I guess in the East, they have an interesting philosophy that really, for the most part, men are born with the same level of intelligence, for the most part, and that their zeal and hard work determines kind of their lot in life, whereas in the West, we tend to want to believe that it's somehow inherited. The third question is, are intelligence tests biased? And I think if you ever have just searched for an old intelligence test, you can tell that the earlier the test, definitely the more biased it is. They asked questions that really only the rich would have the life experiences to draw from in order to answer. The author spent some time in chapter 3 going over all of the different places that he studied and worked in order to kind of build his repertoire to be able to write this book. Spent some time in the biology field and the neuropsychology and the psychology field. And then really, for me, the meat and potatoes of this particular chapter is when he goes into the different intelligences. So I'm going to have to the criteria, rather, for his references. First criteria is the potential of isolation by brain damage. The author was intrigued by the fact that certain faculties could be spared due to a damage, or other ones were singularly affected. Number 2 is an evolutionary history and evolutionary plausibility, which talks mainly about kind of a historical spatial intelligence, saying that early hominids must have been able to, traverse terrain in order to survive. And so this talks about looking at the Homo sapiens and their evolution from early man to where we are now as a criteria for measuring intelligence. The third criteria is an identifiable core of operations. The author mentions the process of playing music or other kind of real-world activities that require a set of competencies and intelligencies to kind of carry out a series of events. The fourth criteria is susceptibility to coding to encoding in a symbol system. And this is ingrained early on in school. Many of us have to deal with many different types of symbol systems. Obviously, numbers and language are the first two that come to mind, but this is the fourth criteria in the author's system. Criteria come from developmental psychology. One is a distinct developmental history along with a definable set of expert end state results. This is talking about how intelligences don't exist in the raw, and how you might have someone in a societal role, which it's important not to confuse that role with actual intelligence. But a lot of times these types of roles can carry with them certain levels of intelligences. And the other one from the developmental is the sixth, which is the existence of idiots, savants, prodigies, or other exceptional people. And this talks about how kind of intelligence can't be captured. It kind of happens in the raw, and so it can't be held, it can't be bound. And so the author is using this as a criteria because when intelligence kind of escapes out of the norm into these people, it can show exactly, it can show a barometer of intelligence in an unlikely place. The final two criteria are from traditional psychiatry, and they are support from experimental psychological tasks, which talks about how if a person can do two separate tasks at the same time, that must be drawing from different brain functions. And so these tasks completed simultaneously are used to identify intelligence. And the last is support from psychometric findings. The book is very heavily based on psychometrics, and so the author wanted to use a lot of those findings within their book. He talks a lot about how he wouldn't go back from when he originally wrote the book in 1983, or rather how he originally identified these intelligences back in 1983, that he wouldn't go back and change many of them. One of the focuses that he said that he would have was that he would be more cross-cultural. He feels that culture has a lot to do with our perception of intelligence.